morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is José Luis Passos, and I direct the Center for Brazilian Studies at UCLA, and I coordinate the Portuguese program at the same university. It's a great pleasure today for me to introduce you to a panel featuring democracy in Brazil. This is a book presentation. This will be moderated by Brian Pitts, the Assistant Director of the Latin American Institute. This event is part of a series of events put together by the Latin American Institute and the Center for Brazilian Studies, featuring Brazilian cultural responses to the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, the elections, and a number of other issues. We're having slight technical difficulties today to add all the panelists, so I ask you to stay put. And we will begin the discussion, the introduction to the panelists and the discussion in a minute. So I want to welcome you all to the event today and also ask you to visit the calendar of events for the Latin American Institute, where you can find more information about our forthcoming events. This is, I believe, the fourth or fifth event that the Center for Brazilian Studies is putting together since the beginning of the academic year in late September. And we have more interesting events coming up, including one in early December on Black Lives Matter in Brazil. So Brian, maybe you could start introducing our speakers today. And thank you all for participating. I hope you're all well and healthy and happy with the election results in the US.
Bom dia, or boa tarde, as the case may be. My name is Brian Pitts, and I am the Assistant Director of the Latin American Institute here at UCLA. I'm really excited about this event today. I'm a Brazilianist myself, and the book that we're going to talk about today, Democracy and Brazil, Collapse and Regression, really is the latest in a long line of very influential edited volumes about Brazilian politics that have been produced at pivotal moments in Brazilian history. One of the most well-known was one that was edited by political scientist Alfred Stepan in the early 1970s, called Authoritarian Brazil, about Brazilian politics during the dictatorship. Another one was Democratizing Brazil, produced in the 1980s. So whenever something really momentous has happened to change Brazil's political system, US and Brazilian political scientists have been at the forefront of analyzing what this means and how this affects how we understand Brazilian democracy and opportunities for participation. What's so great about this volume is that this is a volume that is completely spearheaded by Brazilians. There are authors from other countries among the contributors, but I mean, Brazil has always had a vibrant intellectual tradition, and it's really great now to see how this volume has been completely the initiative of Brazilians. And we US Brazilians can fade into the background, as we should. So the book is going to be introduced to us by Bernardo Bianchi, who is one of the editors of the volume, here in just a moment. Professor Bianchi is a visiting researcher at the Saint Marc Bloch at Humboldt University in Berlin. He holds a dual PhD in political science from the Universidade do Estado do Rio de Janeiro and in philosophy from the Sorbonne, and also a postdoc from the Free University of Berlin. A scholar of many interests in the field of political theory, he has written on the thought of a wide range of theorists, including Spinoza, Machiavelli, and Marx, among others. His most recent research examines the history of concepts of revolution and emancipation. He's going to go ahead and introduce the volume to us. His chapter in the volume is titled Paulo Freire's Legacy and the Ideological Battle in Brazil.
Thank you very much, Brian, for this introduction. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon for my fellows in Brazil, and good evening, Patricia. I also thank Professor José Luis Passos for his very friendly communication and availability to co-organize this event. And today, this is our first presentation of the book. We are very excited to be here. and I am going to expose some of our most most important issues that we have identified in the process of editing and writing this book. So well, this is not new for anybody. Actually, we only fully understand what we have done after it's made. So this book also was very, considering that this project was extremely ambitious in the sense that we wanted to really to put together different styles and different methodologies in explaining the political context, the political and social context of Brazil at the present moment. And so this project was born in 2017 when we gathered together in Berlin to discuss in a conference the means and consequences of the political transformations that were happening at that moment, especially in view of Dilma Rousseff's impeachment in 2016. So throughout the following years, we were joined all by other colleagues, intellectuals who continue to work and discuss with us these original discussions, and also to reflect upon new events, the Temer's government, the murder of Marielle Franco, the imprisonment of Lula, and finally the 2018 elections and the victory of Jair Bolsonaro. Since the beginning, we were very committed in making a complex analysis of the Brazilian political and social situation in view of the singularities of the Brazilian context, but also in view of relevant political phenomena on a global scale. The EU referendum in the UK, the Colombian peace agreement referendum, the election of Trump in 2016, among many other relevant events. So these events invited us to reflect on the Brazilian crisis from a broader and international perspective. Such a perspective was fundamentally different from another way of looking at the matter that was also highly influential in the discussions in Brazil. And in this second perspective, the fate of Brazil and the collapse of its and the corrosion of its institutions was mainly connected to events that were shaping its history from the inside. You know? So from a short-term perspective, from the 2013 demonstration to the election of Jair Bolsonaro. So in view of these, we could say that the political analysis was split between an endogenous and an exogenous perspective. In a certain sense, we endorsed this split insofar as we were absolutely committed to avoiding any kind of reductionism. We were adamant that the endogenous dynamic shaping Brazil cannot be reduced to external factors, but we could not tolerate the fact that the de-democratization process underway in Brazil in this time period was not to be understood solely as the result of the miseries of a distant reality confined to a determinate social and political experiences. So this book was fundamentally animated from the beginning by this dialectical, not in a Hegelian sense, but dialectical, as a conflictual commitment of presenting Brazil as a showcase for a process of de-democratization in contemporary societies while grasping its singularity. And one of the ways these overlap between the universal and the particular takes shape in the continual growth of the right-wing and ultra-right discourses amid the Brazilian it takes shape in this continual growth of the right-wing and the ultra-right discourses amid the Brazilian political turmoil. Since the the process of redemocratization, which culminated in the restoration of the democratic institutions in the 80s in Brazil, the depth of Brazilian social problems has undermined the power of right-wing rhetoric in both liberal and conservative sectors. I was just watching a debate about a new book that was released in Brazil about the political context, written by Jair Nicolau. And Jair Nicolau who is a specialist in political analysis. He was showing a very interesting information, showing that during the writing of the Constitution in Brazil in 87, 88, 2/3 of the congressmen, they identified themselves as being leftists. So the very label right wing has been regarded in this time period as an efficient disqualification method in the political arena. The last few years have changed the situation dramatically. The right-wing camp is no longer ashamed to state their preferences, organized through think tanks as well as by ideologues such as Olavo de Carvalho. They have developed a sophisticated ideological front which spreads hate discourse, hate speech against minorities, and what they label as cultural modernity. Just like before 64, moralism has become a central feature of the new Brazilian conservatism, which, notwithstanding its intrinsic heterogeneity, reveals important general characteristics. So with the election of what we see is that whereas the rise of the right cannot be assigned solely to Brazil, Bolsonaro is in fact one of the most radical expressions of contemporary right-wing forces compared to other chiefs in other states. Even though Brazilians do not live under a fascist political regime at the moment, there is a clear expansion of fascist politics, like the open defense of violence, a strong sense of natural hierarchies, and the pick of minorities as public enemies. So in the book, we define this as the ultra-right, as political movements that combine a fascist political language and an electoral strategy for power. The conjunction between regular institutional means with frequent symbolic and physical violence demands a different concept, different from the regular uses of terms like extreme right that usually concern groups that do not act in those different political scenarios. So, moreover, unlike the populist radical right, as defined by Cass Mudd, for instance, economics plays here, in the case of the Brazilian ultra-right, a central role, which incorporates elements from neoliberal and ultra-liberal discourses. So these are the main topics I wanted to bring to you about how we reflected upon these issues in the book. And I would like now to invite the co-editor, or should I? Sorry, Brian. Maybe you should be doing this now. I just finished the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So now we're going to hear from another of the volume's co-editors, Professor Patricia Rangel, who is coordinator of Mulheres Eleitas, an initiative of the Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro and the Universidade Federal Rural do Rio de Janeiro that studies the political activity of women elected to Congress on both the left and the right. She is also a consultant for a variety of international organizations active in Brazil. She holds a PhD in political science from the Universidade de Brasília and postdocs from the Free University of Berlin and the Universidade de São Paulo. Her research focuses on the intersection and tensions between feminism, as envisioned by the state and by women's social movements, not only in Brazil, but also throughout Latin America, especially in Argentina and Chile. And due to some of our technical problems earlier, Professor Rangel was not able to get into the webinar until it actually started. So I know you have a PowerPoint to show. Were you planning on sharing your own screen, or would you like me to share it for you?
I can do it myself. Thank you, Brian. Okay. So first of all, I'd like to thank you one more time, Brian and Jose, for this huge opportunity to be here and to talk a little bit about our work. We were very excited and happy to be welcomed by you in UCLA. So I think I have around 10 minutes, so I'll try to be brief and objective. Let me see if I can do it. It's not my specialty. So yeah, today I am supposed to present to you the chapter 11. The chapter 11, let me see if I can share only the presentation. Can you see my screen? Okay, I think so.
Perfect.
Great. So first of all, before starting, I really want to thank to my colleagues, my co-authors in this chapter, Dr. Eneida and David, who is actually applying to become a PhD in Pittsburgh University. So I wanted to comment briefly how the idea came up. Eneida and I were working together for over a decade. We have always, oh, by the way, hi Eneida, and thank you. I know she's online, I just checked it, so I'm really happy that she's following us. And in case we have questions, she can also reply and join us in the debate. So yeah, Eneida and I have been working together for over a decade. We have been doing multiple analyses regarding women's representation in Brazil and in South America. I am a political scientist and she's a lawyer. So we always have this kind of match between the two disciplines, which has always been really fruitful to our analysis. However, some points, some questions that we had were not actually answered because I am a qualitative political scientist. And we wanted to bring more evidence, like evidence-based analysis to our work. And as we were building this chapter, this work on the changes of women's political representation after this right-wing tide and this de-democratization process started, we came to get to know David McCoy, which is who is a quantitative political scientist. So in order to build this really nice work, I am so proud of it, we had this very good fit, this very good match between this lawyer knowledge, the qualitative political science knowledge, and also the quantitative approach. So I am really happy and excited with the results. So today I'm trying to address 4 topics. Due to the limitation of time, maybe I don't manage to do it, but let's try at least. So our chapter is called De-Democratization in Brazil and the New Puzzle of Women's Political Representation. So first of all, I wanted to comment what the puzzle of political representation is. Secondly, I want to briefly mention the background in which we conduct our analysis. And afterwards, I would like to to present a few outcomes regarding women's political descriptive representation and substantive representation. So what is the puzzle of women's representation? As maybe some of our colleagues in the audience who are familiar with feminist literature and political science know that typically the mainstream political science with this feminist approach maintains or argues that there is a strong positive relationship between women's descriptive representation and women's substantive representation, or in other words, between politics of presence and politics of idea, which means usually we get to think that if there are many women elected to a parliament or other political institutions, the content of their action is going to be positive as well. So that's why we established this positive relationship between both dimensions of women's political representation. Regarding to Brazil, there is this very solid and actually a reference for feminist studies in the country, which was developed by Malatan in 2002. She was the one who actually talked about this puzzle of women's political rights in Brazil. And what is this puzzle? She argued that on the one hand, Brazil historically has a very low level of women's descriptive representation. As you can see in the screen on the left side, there are, those are current data, right? So there are at the moment only 3% of governors in Brazil, which actually refers to only one woman running a federal state in Brazil. And there are only 15% of women amongst the Congress people. Those are just mere examples, right? If you look at any political institution, you're going to find out that women are usually underrepresented in Brazil. So this is on the one hand. On the other hand, Malatan, she states that historically Brazil has one of the most vibrant feminist movements in the world, and that we have been managed to pass very positive and advanced legislation and other political policies regarding women's rights. So we have this contradiction, which called the puzzle, right? So why is the puzzle important? After 2016, with the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff, and after the election of Jair Bolsonaro in 2018, we have noticed that women were getting more elected. They were getting more seats in the political institutions. And on the other hand, we were observing every day that women's rights were suffering a backlash. They were shrinking. And this was so obvious that, well, as a political scientist and Eneida as a lawyer, we were always tracking and mapping the changes in the policies, in the legislation, and we were, through evidence, observing that women's rights were suffering this backlash. How is this possible if there is this positive relationship between descriptive and substantive representation of women? And that's why we decided to write this work. So our central question for the chapter was, in face of the recent critical junctures, has women's substantive and descriptive representation be altered or no? If it was altered, how? And what are the reasons? Of course, I don't have much time to go through all we have been studying in details, but I can give you some highlights on the most important things. So the background is really dramatic, actually. In 2016, as you know, we had the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff, which was very, very questionable. And Rousseff was the first and only female president in the history of Brazil. During her impeachment process, as you can see in the figure on the right side, on the top, there were so many misogynistic expressions, not only amongst policymakers, but also amongst the population. This is one example of a sticker which was produced to put on the cars. So you can see the president with her legs opened in the very sexualized position, which is a form, of course, of demoralization of women in politics. Also, during her impeachment process, Jair Bolsonaro, who back then was just a congressman, he dedicated his vote to the Colonel Brilhante Ustra, who was the most infamous torturer during the military dictatorship. And we must remember that Rousseff herself was fighting against the dictatorship and she was tortured. Finally, we had the election of this very congressman with the support of a growing conservative evangelical population. So, and there was, on the time of the election process, there was a strong and relevant resistance from women, especially women's movements. There was this huge movement called Ele Não, which means not him. But despite this mobilization, this social mobilization, he got elected. And actually he got elected with an estimated to have won between 50 and 54% of the female vote. So this is also a very interesting contradiction. Also, actually, a few months after his election, we had the murder of Marielle. Bernardo mentioned this fact already, which we can see as one of the expressions of misogynistic and racist political violence against women. But I'm not going to speak in detail about it. So, regarding the puzzle, we, as I mentioned before, we observed that after this de-democratization process, so after this right-wing tide, this conservative tide in Brazil, despite all this, women got elected more widely. So not for governors, as you can see, and not for senators, but if we look to the federal chamber, like the Congress itself, there was a huge increase in the number of congresswomen and also in state congresses. And this was really, really intriguing for us. On the same time, those women who got elected, what were they doing? Actually, they started to legislate against historical important issues for feminist movements. For example, if we consider the sexual and reproductive rights, there was a massive amount of new draft bills regarding the right to legally abort. So in Brazil, as you probably know, abortion is largely prohibited. It is permitted only if the woman in case gets raped or if she has a serious death risk for her and the baby, for example. But those new draft bills, they actually try to make the prohibitions more intense and larger. So for us to have just a picture of what the women elected are doing, only in the first year of Bolsonaro's government, we had 28 8 new proposals, new draft bills trying to make legal abortion more difficult, and actually trying to cancel and to extinguish legal abortion. And although men are historically the most responsible for this kind of draft bills, the congressperson who was responsible in this first year of government for the biggest amount of draft bills was actually a congresswoman, which is Cristo Nieto, this one on the left side up. So she presented many bills trying to set the definition of life from the conception, to establish the National Week of the Unborn Child, and to suspend access to legal abortion. Besides that, there was a huge defunding of the budget of women's machinery. So if we consider between 2014 and 2019, the government resources for racial equality decreased 81%. And if we consider the budget for women's policies, it fell 71%. If we consider, before that, the organization Human Rights Watch made a study about the budget respect to the budget dedicated to fight gender-based violence, and the organization came to the conclusion that only 40%, which was designated to fight and to face gender-based violence, was maintained in 2019. As a result, for example, of course, gender-based violence increased in Brazil, and now it is even more dramatic due to the pandemic. And despite all this, the budget for next year of this, the National Secretariat for Women's Policies, Secretaria Nacional de Políticas para Mulheres, is 19% lower than the budget of 2020. Besides that, we have an almost all-male cabinet. We have only 2 women who are ministers, and one of them is responsible for the Ministry of Women, Family, and Human Rights. She's a very acknowledged pro-life activist. There is a picture of her on the right top side, Damaris Alves. And besides that, women's machineries, which were historically a tool of gender equality and which were historically coordinated by feminist women, became or went to the hands of conservative women. So what we conclude for all that, considering all that, we have been observing that far-right congresswomen are a majority amongst the female representatives who were elected in 2018. So amongst the 77 congresswomen, we have 45 right-wing congresswomen. And they are not legislating for gender equality. Of course, there is no such a thing as an universal idea of woman or womanhood, but assuming that there are interests and issues to be represented, we might argue that those right-wing congresswomen are not represented the majority or the diversity of Brazilian women's perspectives. We have noticed that although only 7% of those congresswomen actively fight sexual and reproductive health, most of them joined pro-life and religious fronts. So although they are not very active, they are very conservative and they are anti-feminist actors, definitely. So going to our puzzle and doing the last comment, I'd like to say that although there is usually this this argument, this link between descriptive representation of women or their presence and their substantive representation or the ideas or the actions that they do. This link might not exist. We have not seen this link in this study. Many Congresswomen have agreed to just back up the words and the hate speeches against women, against Afro-Brazilian population, against indigenous, against quilombola, against working class. And they have strong links with neo-Pentecostal religious apparatus, and they are resonating this de-democratization tide, this conservative tide. So our examination concluded that part of the gender setback that we are observing at the moment may be coming, and actually is coming, from women themselves. So in order to rethink the moment and to propose new ideas of democracy, we have to include women, of course, but we have to include women who are not associated with the democratization project, definitely. That's it. Thank you. I spoke too much. I hope it's not a trouble.
Thank you so much, Patricia. I think that what you said about what matters more, whether women are represented or what they do, is something that really resonates with us in the United States as well, due to the recent debate about Amy Coney Barrett's nomination to the Supreme Court and the extent to which that was a victory for women. So turning to our next speaker, it is Professor Flavia Rios. She is Professor of Social Sciences at the Universidade Federal Fluminense. Her PhD is in Sociology from the Universidade de São Paulo. She conducts research on a wide range of topics related to gender, race, and violence in Brazilian politics and society since the end of the military dictatorship in 1988, including topics like political assassination in Rio, educational policies to reduce racial inequality, Black women's activism and intellectual production, and police violence against people of color in Brazil. She's going to present her chapter from the volume, which is titled Cycles of Democracy and the Racial Issue in Brazil, 1978 to 2019. And we also didn't have a chance before the webinar to talk about whether you would like to show this, whether you'd like to share your screen or have me share my screen of your PowerPoint presentation.
Can you show, please? Brian, can you show for me, please?
Sure, let me go ahead and get it started here.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Good afternoon, good evening, I don't know.
You're on mute right now. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Okay. My PowerPoint is similar. Patricia's PowerPoint. Thank you, Patricia. You're so genius. Thank you. First of all, I want to.
You're on mute again. I don't know how that happened. Desculpa, Flávia, a gente não está te ouvindo. Você vai ter que...
I'm sorry.
Pronto,
I'm sorry again.
Again.
Okay, I will start in the beginning. First of all, I want to say thank you, Brian Pitts, for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be at this academic event. Thanks, Jose, for moderation in this discussion. Thank you both for giving visibility to our book at the UCLA. And I would also like to thank you, Jorge Chalub, Bernardo Bianchi, and my dear friend Patricia Rangel, because you, Patricia, never left me behind and you never let go of my hands in this process, very difficult process. And finally, thank you, Otto Wolff, because he reviewed my chapter and asked me many questions, many basic questions, and important question for clarified my arguments and showed better the Brazilian experience. My idea in this work was to wash the comprehensive view about anti-racism in Brazil, on the hand, and the other hand, I would like to present the coup and the extreme rights and how the coup and the extreme rights, fair rights, affect the racial equality agenda in Brazil, which has been a model of positive policies for Blacks in South American, South American for almost 2 decades. Brazilian, it was a big model for the other countries because the racial politicals are good for Brazilian people. And my presentation is about 3 moments in Brazilian history. It's a kind of cycle of democracy. The first question is, when and how did claims against racism enter the public agenda in Brazil? In the first moment, I tried to show the democratization, how the social movement, political parties, and the state take together and work for the anti-racism agenda in Brazil. In the second period, I tried to show the democratic establishment, especially in Fernando Henrique Cardoso government and Lula government and Dilma too, because the 3 governments were very important for changes in Brazil, especially in an equality discussion about race. In the end, I tried to show what's happened in Brazil, and especially if you observe the rights for Black people, space for social movement, space and discussions about race, equalities, justice, and the others important things to work for Black people and equality and women rights in Brazil. In these slides, you can find all my ideas, especially if you want to know about my theoretical approach. I'm a sociologist and I work with a lot about these issues in my life, in my experience. And in my studies, I discovered that we can find many changes in the state and in social movement too. Can you put it next, please, Brian? Thank you. Okay, in this first moment is important to understand the emergence of Black movement, the new generation of Black women, and the language of rights in this period. And in this period, the movements are so I forgot the words. The movement was so strong, and the language of protests was very positive, especially because the Black movement claimed against racial democracy, claimed against authoritarianism and the other types of violence against Black people, poor people, peripheral people in Brazil. And you can put the next, please. Right, okay. In the second moment, it's important for Black women, especially because in the Cardoso government and Lula government, the Black women worked a lot in this institutionalized space in the states in Brazil. In this picture, you can find Matilde Ribeiro and other Black important women. She is professors, diplomatics, and other kind of liberal works, and very important leadership for social movement in Brazil, representative people in Brazil. Next, please, next one. Brian, thank you. In this moment, it's so terrible for us because you can find far-right Black people, you can find new teams, new agents, new strategies. The important thing is all the right that Black people win in the past, change a lot, because you can find in Bolsonaro government, Black people claim against right for Black people, special action of affirmative action, and right for quilombola. The quilombolas are a kind of rural Black people in Brazil, and especially you can find in our country today, Black people talk about I'm sorry, I'm confused my ideas here. Sorry. In this period, yeah, the Black people proposed new agenda about race. In this moment, you can find other things like colorblind, or all the people are Brazilian people, no race here, no Black here, no indigenous here, no quilombolas in my country. All the people are Brazilian. It's a problem because in this kind of ideology, you cannot talk about racism, discrimination, segregation, and the other kinds of problems about race in Brazil. Okay, but things change, and I think that you can find other things, interesting things in Brazil. And now I read for you, I read for you a little part of my chapter, and I try to show new change, good change in this period, especially new generations, Black, youngs, specifically humans, Black women. Okay, this new generation sees to act with more intensity for the interactions between social movements and legislative power. To a certain extent, in the the last elections, despite the expansion of political conservatives in the legislative and executive space, women and Black Brazilians achieved political representation in the legislative space with qualitative prominence for Black women, constituting expressive minorities engaged with social movements. Perhaps this is the new tenuous political direction for a democratic alternative in Brazil. Okay, for me, you can find two ways. The first one is the conservative Black people claims against rights. And the other way you can find new generations, Black women, try to convince people to change our situation. Thank you so much, Brian and the others. I'm here, I'm listening to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Rios. So we're going to be joined now for the Q&A by Professor Jorge Chalub, a third co-editor of the volume. He is a professor of social sciences at the Universidade Federal de Juiz de Fora, located in the state of Minas Gerais. He holds a PhD in political science from the Universidade do Estado do Rio de Janeiro. His research covers a wide variety of topics in Brazil's political history, including discourses about redemocratization at the close of the Estado Novo, the thoughts of the famed legal scholar Sobral Pinto, and right-wing politics in Brazil. His chapter in this volume, which he will not be presenting right now, but just so you can know, is Corruption and Neoliberalism in Contemporary Brazil, and that's co-authored with Pedro Luis Lima. I'm going to take the first question from Professor Kia Caldwell, since she's not going to be able to stay for the entire panel, so we can get to her question right away. She asked, with regard to women politicians in Brazil, I wonder how much this conservatism can also be linked to white supremacy, as we've seen in the U.S. And, I believe that means white supremacy on the part of these female politicians.
Can I answer that, or would you like to do it, Flavia?
You can start, Patricia, please. The second moment
Okay. So yeah, I think Flavia is going to give us very interesting input, as she is the expert in racial dynamics and racism and political and institutional racism. But I can make a few comments regarding my field of expertise, which is gender studies. By the way, I and the 3 other colleagues are writing a new chapter on this topic at this moment. Actually, misogyny and racism, they are deeply connected, of course. When we consider politics, the institutional politics, we usually have in mind the universal subject, which is male, white, and straight, Christian, amongst other trends. So when it comes to the traditional gender roles, they are also racial roles, and I'll try to be more concrete in this argument. The idea of the very idea of what an ideal woman is a very racial idea as well. So if we consider what the conservative and the traditional politicians have in mind for an ideal woman, it is a white woman. And this white woman is allowed to enter politics as long as she understands what her place is. So this is an educated woman. This is a woman which has family values, who has traditional values. So this ideal woman, she is white, because the women of color, or the Black woman, as we say in Brazil, we say mulheres negras, black women. We don't use the terminology women of color, but I think they are interchangeable. They don't even enter this realm of the ideal woman because in Brazil, they were historically dehumanized. So, of course, the two issues, the two topics are deeply connected. Misogyny and racism are deeply connected, not only in the political life, but in any other social aspects. And the universal subject of politics is also gendered and it's also racialized.
Okay, thank you. Patricia, I agree with you. About racial issues is interesting because all the time we compare Brazil and the USA and people say, oh, supremacy, white supremacy in Brazil, there are white supremacy. It's interesting because be careful, you can, in Brazil, it's very different because you can find whiteness is possible because many people say I'm white. It's official category in Brazil. It's very important demographic demography population. And but it's interesting because in Brazil, white supremacy is quite different. If you compare with USA, it's not a common term in Brazil. You can find the white man is a reality in Brazil. The white man who control power, and the white man never say about their whiteness. It's interesting because it's a phenomenon in Brazil and the other country in Latin America. And today you can find more studies about whiteness, and people try to understand how the white men control the power and the other things like academy, like work and the others areas of society. And it's interesting. It's a new subject for study in Brazil. That's it.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to a question from Christina Chica, who is asking, and I think this is one that can be addressed to all the panelists, probably pretty much equally. Can someone speak to the role evangelicals and their organizing and potentially international networks play in this right-wing extremism, the rise of authoritarian policies, and erosion of human rights? The rise of the right is clearly a global issue, and I'd like to know more about its relationship to the growth of global evangelical power.
Hi, Brian, and I think I can answer that. First, I'd like to thank to Brian, to José Luis, and to Flavia, Patricia, and Bernardo, and say that it's an honor to speak to all of you and to show a little of our work in the book. And first, about Christina's question, I would like to say that we have a chapter in the book that talks about religion and politics in this de-democratization process in Brazil, wrote by Margarina Cimento Cunha. So beyond my brief answer, I think you should all read this chapter. But the role of evangelical is central in this de-democratization process. But I think close to Ronaldo Almeida's writings, that we should first think about the far-right religious coalition, because respecting the particularities of each religion, we have a big coalition between far-right Catholic, far-right Jewish, and far-right evangelics. And they all function as a veto coalition. They all function as a veto coalition against, in the first moment, against the left-wing actors, like the Workers' Party and others left-wing actors. But beyond that, they function as a veto coalition against the proper idea of public politics in Brazil. So and they function as a veto coalition against the 1988 Constitution. So the 1988 Constitution functions as a, I don't know, as a summary of all these fights against authoritarian past in Brazil, these feminist fights, these fights of the unified Black movement in Brazil, the fights of the worker parties and the labor movements. And I think they all have in common a certain idea of public, a certain idea of building a public sphere in Brazil that can fight for rights, that then make public policies in Brazil. And this coalition wants to bring back like a protagonist of the family, a protagonist of a certain private hierarchies in Brazil that seems to be in the past after 1988. So I'm following Ronaldo Almeida. There is a professor in University of Campinas in Unicamp, and I think that this reflection about the right-wing coalition between different religions is more interesting than just looking at evangelicals, because evangelicals they have certain particularities in the public sphere. They are really loud, they are really strong in their discourses. But the Catholic veto coalition against left wing, I think, is really, really strong, and we can't let this decide. So I think that is really important and more interesting to think how this de-democratization process is a de-democratization process against the bright side of the 1988 Constitution, against the rights that all the fights against the last authoritarian movements they were able to build in Brazil. And I think that this is more deep and more suggestive than only talk about evangelicals. But this is a brief answer. I another time say that the Magali Cunha's chapter is really interesting in showing how this religious movement and the right-wing evangelicals acts in Brazil.
Did anybody else want to add anything to that? Right, vamos à próxima pergunta, então. I'm going to go ahead and paraphrase the next question from Steve Williams. Points out that he was reading a Twitter feed today talking about what things might look sort of like the authoritarian playbook and the way that's playing out in the United States, and whether this might be indicative of the last 2 years of the Bolsonaro government and the next election in 2022. So first, you have a far-right candidate who inspires the opposition to vote, the opposition to the current political system, to vote in droves for their candidate. Then you have your core followers, right? What we call in Brazil the Bolsominions, who are not the majority of Bolsonaro's voters. They love it, but this government by spectacle wears everybody else out and gets everybody else tired. Third, as we've seen in the United States, a broad front among people opposed to the, towards the authoritarian populist leader, and these disparate parties and factions defeat the right. And then fourth, if the right wing candidate or president is not able to win the censor, he cries fraud, charges that undermine what's left of democracy. Do we see something like these last two steps perhaps happening in 2022 in the next Brazilian election?
my internet connection is stable, so but I think I can also wrote this one. So just a little moment to come back to the question that that Brian has just read. Sorry, because I just lost the end of the question that I have noted here. One moment.
Jorge,
Oh,
while you try to go back to the question, I'd like to comment the first question that Steve did. Actually, it was a comment. Is it okay if I can do it while you find yourself?
Yeah, perfect.
Cool. So yeah, so Steve did many questions. Now I'm not finding them on this chat, but yeah.
Was it
but
the
I
first
wanted
one about anti-feminists being elected in greater numbers than ever?
Yes, that's the one I wanted to comment. This was really interesting. I'm not sure if I can draw a line to compare with the United States, but I can tell for the Brazilian case. It's so intriguing that, well, usually the literature suggests that the impeachment and the misogynistic, the anti-systemic politics would have a negative impact on the ability of women to enter, to run an election, to enter the races, and to get successful, to attain office in the political institutions. But which was really interesting and intriguing for us is that, well, there is also this recent other literature that argues that such moments of popular discontent and anti-system sentiments, emotions, they can also have a tendency to favor female candidates. And this is what we actually observed in the Brazilian case. And why this happens? Because when you have this very popular discontent moments, which led, for example, the support to the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff, when you have this super anti-systemic, anti-status quo moment and emotions, this can also be open the path for other anti-systemic candidacies. And as historically the political institutions were run and were led by men, women became somehow also anti-systematic candidacies. And this is really interesting. So we found that this element was especially appropriate for the analysis that we did in Brazil, given the sustained dominance of men in politics, as I mentioned, and the eruption of the frustration and this popular discontent in the recent times. So yeah, we found this literature that was also predicting this countervailing effect for women in this case. And this is what the data showed us in the quantitative analysis, which was conducted mainly by David McCoy. And in this quantitative analysis, we learned that the parties who voted for Dilma's impeachment ran more female candidates for mayors in 2016 than in the previous election, 2012, while the leftist parties ran fewer female candidates in 2016. So this was impressive. It was a big surprise for me, and I think it's very related to what Steve Williams mentioned in his first comments.
Now I was able to read Steve Williams' comments also. And I think that one first idea about all this, this idea of a front against far right or against Bolsonaro or against Trump one important idea is that Bolsonaro's coalition is a really heterogeneous coalition. It's not, the coalition is not based on one single idea or one single movement. Of course, one single idea is the fight against the left, but the left is really, really a wide concept in Bolsonaro governments. So following this idea, I think that's not easy to make a big movement or a big front, a big coalition against Bolsonaro or against far right in Brazil. Of course, we can try it. Of course, it's important to think about it, but I don't think it's really easy because there are some groups that support Bolsonaro because of his economic policies. There are other groups that support Bolsonaro because of his new conservative agenda. And there are also other groups that support Bolsonaro because they have some kind of new fascist idea of nation, an effort to restore in Brazil an idea that was in really some moments of military dictatorship hegemonic, but it's really hard to think that you have just a single idea that are common to all these groups. So this idea of heterogeneous coalition is interesting because it shows the potential of crisis inside Bolsonaro coalition. So it seems to be easier to see crisis, to see conflicts, to see a possible fall of Bolsonaro coalition, but also it makes more difficult to think in a wide group against far right in Brazil, because when things to achieve the moment, oh, Bolsonaro, he deals with the pandemic with COVID-19 in an absurd way. Oh, Bolsonaro, he says that he will kill his opponents. So when you think, oh, this is we have crossed a moment when we start to have a big and wide coalition against Bolsonaro, you have always difficulties in creating these political actors. So trying to answer the question, I think the book is an effort that tries in many ways to answer to these different perspectives of the far-right movement in Brazil, because this de-democratization process, more than an actor or a moment, is something similar to a social fact in Durkheim sense. So it has many perspectives and many ways of looking at it. So we try to deal with that in the book in the better way possible.
So we're just about out of time. I do want to go ahead and get to one question from someone who we haven't taken a question from yet. So Stephanie Reist is asking about the issue of voting and elections in Brazil. You know, one issue we have a lot in the United States, what we call disenfranchisement, or legal attempts to exclude people from voting. And together with racial and gender violence, this seems to give credence to an emergent fascism, although many are skeptical of that term. In Brazil, the dynamic seems to be different due to the relative universal ease of voting. However, in the urban peripheries, like the Baixada Fluminense, voter intimidation is rampant, although under-theorized and debated. How should we think about voting and elections in this Brazilian context of democratic regression?
I can start in this turn. It's interesting question because especially in Rio de Janeiro, the political violence is so important. We are research about this, and we discovered that in this year, 18 candidates died, murdered, I forgot the word, died, and it's a very problematic situation because you can find like Marielle Franco and the others women who works in the states, like parliamentary people. And interesting because we have extra military people in Brazil, and militias, I don't know how can I say this group, this illegal group in English, like mafia. It's not mafia, but it's a similar thing. And it's a problem for us because it's a kind of authoritarianism in Brazil. Sometimes women cannot work in politics because they don't secure it in the space, in the peripheral areas especially. And it's interesting to talk about this because Bolsonaro have the policies in Brazil, military force and illegal forces too. It's a problem because Rio de Janeiro is the space, the area that we can find these situations. The best situation is here. It's like this kind of situations. That's it. That's only my position.
Did anybody else want to add anything to that, or? Okay, well, with that, we are at the close of our time. I would like to thank all of our viewers for joining us today. You are welcome to check out more about the events here in the Latin American Institute and at the Center for Brazilian Studies at our website, www.international.ucla.edu/LAI. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And in addition, we would strongly encourage you to purchase the book, which you can find on Amazon. It's published by Routledge this year in 2020. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Congratulations on the publication of a truly important and path-breaking book that has relevance not only for understanding this turn to the right in Brazil, but globally as well. So thank you for that. Obrigado a todos.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Boa tarde.
Thank you.